Okay, well, good afternoon, Sharon. Thank you for joining us on this discussion about the Procurement Act, which I know you are a resident expert on all things public procurement, published author, etc. So I thought you're the best person to discuss this. I
Hmm.
know that you and I were both involved in the Green Paper consultation process,
Yes.
you and I both made contributions to that,
Yeah.
and we've been watching it really from its very inception
Mm.
right through to its recent implementation. It's become
Yeah.
law. I think it's actually become law uh, very recently.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has.
So, Sharon, over to you. Let me welcome you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ray. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about what is currently my favourite subject, which is the Public Procurement Act. Yeah, it is probably
Sharon, you need
the.
to get out more, really.
I probably do, don't I? That is definitely the case. But yeah, it's probably the most seminal piece of legislation on public procurement, probably
Uh-huh.
decades, probably since the first set of European public procurement directives that we had, 20, 30 years ago. But what this does is it takes public procurement in the UK into a much more flexible environment, and there's impacts for both buyers and suppliers. Um, the buyers have now got much more flexibility in terms of the procedures that they can use. So we're not prescribed like we used to be under the original EU based legislation, which were very siloed in terms of the procedures that you could choose. We have maintained a couple of those procedures, which is the open tender and the direct award or single source. But all the other variations that we had are now lumped into one which is called a competitive flexible. And it's basically allowing the buyers to say, what am I buying? What is the complexity of that? What is the nature of that? And how, therefore, do I want to design my own procurement procedure rather than having set routes they have to choose? Suppliers, on the other side, have always complained about the lack of transparency in public procurement. So, again, that is a big change in the Procurement Act. More notices will be published on what is now a new central digital portal, which suppliers and buyers have to register on. Suppliers can see a lot more of what is going on in the environment. And they only have to register once, which is another great bonus. They don't have to register on every
Yeah.
single government portal, it's just the one. And everything is going to be there and open to that transparent publication in the future. So, some really, really beneficial changes. On the flip side of flexibility is, of course, that transparency. And yes, the administration is going to be quite high, but I think in the long run, that's actually going to be a better thing.
I guess the question would have to be, I mean, the EU directives were designed for a certain purpose.
Yes.
Like, was that purpose to ensure that there would be no corruption, no, there would be high levels of probity, and the fact that you would get value for money for public sector organisations. Now, that begs the question: does that mean there may be more opportunities for things to go awry with the new procedures? I know
Oh,
I'm
good
putting you on the
question.
spot here, but
Yeah, yeah,
is
that
there
is.
a risk? I mean,
Um, Possibly, possibly not. I think the quid pro quo here is the amount of transparency has massively increased. If you sort of take what the Union directives were all about, it was about procuring within a common market and within a single market and allowing the free movement of goods, services, and people within that single market. So it was very internal looking. Um, I wouldn't say that that was necessarily a good thing and that corruption never happened because
oh yeah,
corruption can happen in any system anywhere.
of course, yeah.
But the transparency wasn't there, and that was the problem. There was a limited amount of notices that had to be published. Now we've gone from 4 mandatory notices to 13 potentially throughout the life of the contract. So it's not just about placing and procuring the contract. It's the first time ever that any kind of procurement legislation has talked about contract management, which is a big piece that I know you and I talk about a lot in world's commerce and contracting. Is think about the whole contract life cycle here, and it was that back end bit that was always a bit of a black art to those of us who were outside of the public sector in terms of what was going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you say that, and that's a really good point. But also, I mean, when I read the paper, the act, it
Mm,
doesn't. it doesn't. Although there's lots of emphasis on transparency, there's no longer a requirement for detailed debriefing, is there? Like there was in the
No.
now that seems to me to be slightly less less transparent rather than more. But have I misunderstood that, or what's your thoughts on that?
That's all down to what they've changed now in terms of debrief. So actually, if you read the previous legislation, yes, there was a requirement if a supplier formally asked for one for it to be given within 15 working days.
Oh, yeah.
Although whether that ever really happened in reality begs the question. What they've done now is they've turned that debrief into better feedback at the end of the tender. So there's now what are called assessment summaries. So
right.
if you win a bid, you will get a letter that it describes you've won the bid and a table at the back with all of the questions, all of the award criteria, all of the marking, your own scores and your feedback. If you are an unsuccessful tenderer, you get exactly that based on your tender, your scores, your feedback, but you also get the data on the winning bidder.
Yeah, okay.
It is now a case of there's the information, supplier, that's what we're telling you, right. And there is the information for your tender and the winning bidder.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, that does answer that question because, I mean, it was always good practice for public sector outfits to do that. You know, you score and then anonymise the other bidders and all that kind of stuff. That was pretty standard, but not so much on the winning bid. But yeah, if that's a requirement now, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
thing that's come out for this. So, what overall then do you think is how would you summarise the overall impact of the Act?
Okay, I think it is about the flexibility of the procedures. Before, when we were limited to a restricted or a competitive procedure in negotiation or a competitive dialogue, the public authorities had to choose. And in some instances, that would be, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in some procurements. Yeah. The best fit, okay, we'll go for that one. The problem was then that once they'd made that decision, they had to stick with that procedure. And if it wasn't working, exactly. If it wasn't working out, they'd have to stop the procurement and go back to the beginning and start again. What the Act says is that, first of all, you've got this freedom, this flexibility to think about complexity, price, market size, what you're trying to achieve, and design a process yourself that fits what you want. So if it's something that's simple, you can do either an open tender or a simple two-stage tender where you do a pre-qualification, down select, and then the tender. If it's an incredibly complex environment where you have got new technology that you need testing and you can give a bit of funding for that, or you want to do iterative tendering to do down select as you're going through the competition, or you want to develop the solution with suppliers as you're going through, you can build in all of these stages into that procurement. And as long as you tell the suppliers what you're doing and how you're going to down select and lay that timetable out, that gives you that ability to have more proportionality on your procurement process.
Oh, right. Okay.
The other good thing is the Act allows the authorities to amend the procedures. So if they get partway through the procedure and go, oh, we've added a few too many stages here, we'll take some out, or vice versa, they can do that. So the ability to amend and flex during the procedure is probably one of the biggest benefits from this particular Act.
I guess
the transparency, yeah.
I guess what you're saying, it's a bit like they can be more pragmatic. This works for us, this doesn't work for us. Where in the private sector, if it doesn't work, they just say, we're not going to do it this time, we're going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
They're not procedure bound the way that public procurement tends to be. So that's because it's interesting, because I remember one of the statements from the government was that we've got always highly qualified SIPS people, some of which you and I have trained.
Indeed.
But they can't perform, they can't use their art, they can't do what they've been trained to do because of all these restrictions. And I guess now they're saying, well, all these procurement people, you're qualified people, and come and do your stuff,
That's right.
So is this all part of it? Will there be a Brexit dividend in public procurement? Do you think we will get better value for our money? What do you think?
Well, I hope so. I mean, again, one of the whole emphasis is in there is about designing in more social value for money. And there's been a whole host of procurement policy notes that came out the week before the Act went into being, one of which was an updated social value model. But interestingly, there's some areas of public sector now that have exemptions from using that in their award criteria, such as private utilities or defence and security. So it's not a carte blanche, include social value for money if you're buying a tank or something like that anymore. So again, there's been very, very subtle changes in some of that approach.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I was discussing earlier with one of our colleagues that one of my concerns about public procurement is without this rush to rearm, and this extra expenditure, I can see shortcuts being taken and contractors making a lot of money, I suppose understandably out of this, but this idea that when it's an emergency in public sector, like we have with the PPE and COVID, things can go to the wall fairly quickly.
They can.
And there could be consequences. Do you think this new process will deal with that better?
Definitely. There is, and I think they've learnt their lessons from that, actually, because when the legislation was being written, they were very distinctive about the grounds for placing direct awards, single source contracts for things like that in instances such as unforeseen events or emergencies. So there is a whole section of the Act that talks about these are the grounds under which you can and only can place a direct award, and it includes things like unforeseen, urgency. There's a couple of extras for defence and security, which we might see being used in this rush to rearm as well. But it's at least now there. So when they're making their justification and putting their transparency notices out, at least it's out in the public domain now.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, thank you for Sharon. Very interesting, very informative.
Thank you.
As usual. And hopefully we'll have some more of these videos a bit later, and we'll look at some other topic. Maybe discussing some of these contracts when they start to be awarded. we might come back to this topic of due diligence and transparency as the Act rolls out, and
absolutely
how that works. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Ray. Thanks for the chance to discuss it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much.